He never asked me what I needed. Not once. I kept making things anyway. Small things. Careful things. The kind you make when you have run out of words and your hands still need somewhere to go. He would take them, without looking, without pausing, and set them aside the way you set aside something you intend to deal with later. Except later never came. It just kept not coming, and I kept not saying anything about it, and the winter inside that building kept getting into my bones in ways I did not have language for yet. There is a particular kind of woman who loves like this. Quietly. Without receipts. She is not waiting to be thanked. She already knows she won't be. She is just not ready yet to stop. If you have ever kept giving to someone who didn't know how to receive, if that sentence just landed somewhere specific in your chest, stay with me. And if stories like this one find you where you live, subscribe. There are more women here who understand exactly what I mean. The needles made a sound like a clock that couldn't decide whether to keep going. I have been sitting in the same chair for 2 hours. 4th floor, west-facing window, the kind of gray Nebraska afternoon that doesn't so much darken as simply stop trying to be light. From here I could see the old rail yards beyond the Haymarket, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe lines running flat and purposeful toward the horizon. I liked watching them. There was something settling about infrastructure that didn't need you, about things that moved through without asking permission or leaving explanations. The scarf was almost finished. Charcoal wool, tightly spun, from a little shop on P Street run by a woman named Adeline who kept a rescue greyhound behind the counter and never made conversation unless you started it first. I had bought 4 skeins in October, telling myself it was for me. I knew, standing at the register, that it wasn't. Upstairs, somewhere above the library floor, the court was in session. I could hear nothing. The spire was built for exactly that, for sound to die before it traveled, for rooms to keep their business to themselves. I had stopped noticing the silence the way you stop noticing the particular smell of a place you live in. What I noticed now was something else. The wall beside my chair. The way it was cold under my palm in a way that had nothing to do with the season outside. I pulled my hand back and kept knitting. I had not come here for love. I want to be clear about that, not because it matters now, but because it mattered to me then, the distinction. I had come here on a night in March, when I was running from something smaller and more ordinary than a vampire king, a life that had stopped fitting. An ended marriage I had stayed in 2 years past its natural end. A mother's voicemail I had saved on my phone for 11 months without being able to delete it. I had come here because a door had opened and I had walked through it without reading the sign, and by the time I understood where I was, I had already decided to stay. That is not naivety. That is a woman who has made enough careful choices to know that careful doesn't protect you from anything and has decided to try something else. The court let out. I knew because the building changed, some almost imperceptible pressure shift, the way a room feels different when a window is open somewhere on the other side of it. I bound off the last stitch and folded the scarf over my arm. It had taken me 3 weeks. The wool was dense and the pattern was simple. Nothing decorative, nothing that announced itself. Just something that would be warm. I took the stairs. The library was on the 6th floor, and he was in it the way he was always in it, positioned in front of the fire with the particular stillness of someone who is not needed to conserve energy in 4 centuries. Silver-haired. Spine like a sentence that has never once apologized for its grammar. He was reading something I couldn't see the title of, and he did not look up when I came in. I set the scarf on the arm of his chair. He said, without raising his eyes from the page, "You've been busy." It was not a question. It was not quite a compliment. It landed in the exact register of someone acknowledging that a thing has occurred without committing to an opinion about whether it should have. "It gets cold," I said, "in the upper floors." He turned a page. I waited. I don't know what I was waiting for. For seconds, maybe 5. Then I left. The hallway outside the library was the coldest part of the building. I had noticed this before and filed it away without examining it. Standing in it now, I pressed my palm flat against the wall again. Stone beneath plaster. Old stone. The kind that holds temperature like a promise it made to a different century. Cold in a way walls should not be. Not the cold of poor insulation. Not drafts. Something more settled than that. The cold of a place that had been the same temperature for so long that warmth had simply stopped trying to compete. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to. Then I went back to my room, opened my phone, and looked up wool patterns for the next project, something with cables, maybe something that would take longer to finish. Something that would give my hands a reason to keep moving through December.
I did not ask myself why.
Some questions are less honest than the behavior that answers them. That night I woke at 2 a.m. with the particular alertness of someone who has not been asleep as deeply as they thought. The room was dark. The rail yards were quiet. Somewhere below me in the building's deep middle floors something moved, not a sound, exactly. A pressure. The kind you feel in your molars before a storm decides what it's going to be. I lay still and waited for it to pass.
It did.
I pulled the blanket tighter and thought, not for the first time, I should stop. By morning I had already picked out the wool. The trailhead at Wilderness Park was empty on a Wednesday morning in November, which was exactly why I had come. I had the kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't fix, the low-grade kind, the kind that lives just behind your eyes and makes everything feel like you're looking at it through a window that needs cleaning. The air off the Salt Creek was sharp and smelled of mud and dead leaves and something fungal underneath, the particular scent of a landscape that has decided to stop performing and just be what it is for a few months. I had a canvas bag over one shoulder and my good scissors in my coat pocket. I was looking for seed pods, dried grasses, the things that are most themselves after everything decorative has been stripped away. I had been thinking on the drive down from the spire about curiosity. Not mine.
His.
Alaric had been alive for 400 years, and at some point in those 400 years he had stopped asking questions. Not stopped having opinions. He had those in abundance, delivered with the precision of a man who has rehearsed his conclusions so many times they have calcified into fact. But curiosity is different. Curiosity requires the admission that you do not already know. And that admission, I had decided, was something he had quietly excused himself from somewhere around the 15th century and never returned to.
I was not angry about it. I want to be precise about that.
What I felt, crouching at the edge of the trail where a stand of goldenrod had gone to seed, was something closer to the feeling you get standing in a room where someone used to live. Not grief. Recognition. I clipped a stem at the base and held it up. The seed heads had gone silver and loose, the kind of structure that looks fragile, but will hold its shape for months if you let it dry slowly. Everything dead out here looked like it had made a decision. Not given up, decided. There's a difference, and I had spent enough years learning it to know it when I saw it. The gifts were not about hope. I had stopped pretending they were. They were evidence. I was keeping a record. Not for him, not for anyone who would read it, but for the plain reason that someone ought to. A record of what it looks like when a person chooses deliberately to keep caring about something that doesn't know how to be cared for. That is not a small thing. It should be documented. I picked wild bergamot further up the trail, where the path curved toward the creek bed. The stems were woody and the leaves had mostly gone, but the dried flower heads were still intact, small, intricate, the kind of thing you could look at for a long time without exhausting it. I pressed one between my fingers, and the smell came up immediately. Medicinal. Sweet underneath. Like something that knew exactly what it was. I put them in the bag with the goldenrod and walked back to the car. The frame had come from an estate sale on South 27th. Narrow, plain wood, the kind that doesn't announce itself. I spent 2 evenings pressing and arranging the stems, cutting them to fit, learning by trial what the composition needed. There was a satisfaction in it that I didn't try to explain to myself. My hands knew what they were doing even when my head was somewhere else. I brought it upstairs on a Thursday evening. He was at his desk, not the chair by the fire. Papers in front of him, correspondence from the northern courts, I assumed, the Omaha faction that had been making noise about territory lines since October. He looked up when I came in, then at the frame, then back at his papers.
Quaint, he said.
Not cruel. That's the thing I keep returning to. It wasn't cruelty. It was the word of a man selecting from a very limited vocabulary for things he doesn't know how to receive.
Quaint.
Like I had brought him something from a gift shop. Like I had misunderstood the assignment. He reached out and took the frame without rising from his chair. Turned it once in his hands. Set it face down on the shelf to his left. Not thrown. Not dismissed with any force. Just placed there with the casual certainty of someone who has never once had to consider what a gesture costs the person who made it. I watched him do it. I smiled. He noticed the smile. I saw him notice it, and the small line that appeared between his brows told me he had run through several explanations and arrived at none that satisfied him. Good, I thought.
Stay curious about that, at least.
It's a start. I said goodnight and left before he could find a word for it. The stillness, when I got back to my room, had a particular quality. Not peace, something more provisional than peace. The feeling of a task set down, not finished. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands. They were wrong. Not cold. I knew what cold felt like in this building, the way the stone pulled warmth from you at a steady rate like interest on a debt. This was different. The numbness started at the base of my fingers and moved inward, and it had a quality I didn't have a word for yet. Not pain, not absence. More like a signal with no message attached. My body registering something it had not yet decided how to explain. I pressed both palms flat against my thighs and waited. It passed. Mostly. I told myself it was the cold on the trail, the scissors in my coat pocket, the 2 hours of close work with the frame. I told myself these things with the particular conviction of someone who knows they're not being told the whole truth, but has decided that the partial truth is enough to get through the night. By Saturday, I had ordered the walnut box. I did not look up what it meant that my hands had gone quiet in that particular way. I did not call the one friend who might have known something. I went to the Lincoln Artisan Market on 14th Street on a cold, bright morning, found a craftsman with a table at the back, and paid him for a small carved box with a fitted lid. I carried it home wrapped in brown paper and set it on my kitchen table.
I didn't open it that night.
I just left it there, the way you leave something you are not quite ready to begin. The smell of bergamot was still on my hands when I fell asleep. Medicinal.
Sweet.
The smell of something that used to be living, deciding, even now, to hold its shape. The box sat on my kitchen table for 4 days before I opened it. I would walk past it in the morning on my way to make coffee.
Look at it.
Keep moving. There was nothing dramatic in this. I wasn't afraid of it, wasn't avoiding it. It was more that I needed to get used to its presence before I could start using it. The way you live with a decision for a while before you act on it, not because you're uncertain, but because you want to be sure the decision has fully arrived. By the 5th day, it had. The walnut was darker than I expected. Close-grained, with a surface that felt different depending on which direction you ran your thumb across it. Smooth one way, slightly resistant the other, like the wood still remembered which direction it had grown. The craftsman had done the basic carving on the lid, a simple border, clean corners. The interior was lined with a thin layer of cedar. When I lifted the lid that first morning, the smell was immediate and dry and ancient, the smell of a material that has been keeping things safe for a very long time. I set the lid aside and looked at the empty interior. Then I got to work. Retrieving the gifts took 3 days. The scarf was easiest, still on the chair arm in the library, exactly where it had been placed and not moved since, which told me more than I wanted to know. I took it on a Tuesday afternoon when Alaric was in the East Wing meeting with Stellan, folded it into my bag without making a sound, and was back on the 4th floor before anyone noticed I had been upstairs. The frame was on the shelf in the library, face down. I had to wait until the room was empty, which it was, most mornings between 7 and 9. I turned it right side up before I took it, just to see what it looked like for a moment. The goldenrod and bergamot had dried further since I'd brought it up. The colors had deepened rather than faded, the way certain things get more themselves with time. The herb jars were harder. A servant named Petra had moved them to a storage closet off the kitchen. I only found them because I asked Nora, who knew where everything in the spire ended up without ever appearing to pay attention. She handed me the jars without comment. She did not ask what I wanted them for. Nora was like that. Small, watchful, with the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have spent years making themselves useful without making themselves noticed. She was from Omaha originally, had told me this once, briefly, while bringing me tea I hadn't asked for on a night I hadn't slept. She noticed things the way certain birds notice things, completely, quietly, without announcing it. I thought about telling her. I considered it for longer than I'd like to admit, standing in the storage corridor with the 3 herb jars in my arms, listening to the building breathe around me. Nora would have understood. She would not have made it larger than it was or smaller than it was. She would have simply known, and that knowing would have been, in some ways, a relief. I decided against it. Some things should not be interrupted by being witnessed. The witnessing changes them, adds a layer of performance, however subtle, however unintentional. What I was doing needed to stay between me and the work, between me and the box. I went back upstairs. I repaired the scarf first. The hem had been fraying at one end. I hadn't noticed it when I gave it to him, but I noticed it now. A loose edge, a few stitches pulling away from the body of the work. I sat at the kitchen table with the scarf in my lap and the right needle and repaired it properly, not quickly, taking the time it deserved. This is what I need you to understand about the repair. It was not about fixing something broken. The scarf had worked perfectly as a scarf, frayed hem or not. It would have kept someone warm. The repair was about something else. It was about going back. About saying, I see the part of this that was imperfect and I am returning to it, and I am making it right, not because it failed, but because it is worth the attention. That is a different act than making something new. I knew he would not understand the difference when he found the box. Or, more precisely, I knew he would not understand it immediately. Whether he would come to understand it later was a question I had stopped trying to answer. The carving tool was a small one, a detail gouge I had ordered online after watching 3 instructional videos and accepting that I was going to be learning this in real time. The walnut was forgiving if you went slowly, less forgiving if you rushed. I had expected to be frustrated by it, and I was briefly the first evening, the tool slipping, the line not going where I intended. By the 3rd evening, my hands had started to understand. I carved a vine along the left edge of the lid. Simple, no leaves, just the line of it climbing. On the right side, lower, a small bird, compact, wings folded, facing left. I did not know what kind it was. I had not copied it from a reference. It had come from my hands without a model, and I had decided to let it be what it was rather than make it accurate. The shavings curled onto the table as I worked, pale and thin, smelling of something I can only describe as would becoming intentional, the smell of material giving way to purpose. I kept working past midnight most nights. My hands went numb twice more that week. Once while I was carving, once while I was sleeping. The second time woke me. I lay in the dark holding both hands above the blanket, willing the feeling back, and it came, slowly, unevenly, like a radio station the signal keeps interrupting. I had been keeping a small mental record of these episodes. Not written down, just cataloged. Duration, location, severity. The way you track something you are not ready to name, but cannot afford to ignore entirely. I got up, made tea, came back to the table. I had spent months hoping he would open his hands. That was the honest word for it, hoping. The particular sustained ache of wanting someone to become capable of receiving what you are offering. At some point that week, I could not tell you which night, they had started to blur. I stopped. Not bitterly. Not with resignation. More like setting something down that you have been carrying a very long way, and your arms simply report that they are done. I stopped hoping. And then, quietly, without announcement, I opened mine instead. One last time. The box was sealed. The work was done. What remained was the waiting, and waiting, I had learned, has its own particular weight when you already know how the thing ends. I was not frightened. I want to be clear about that, the way I have been clear about other things. What I felt in those first days of December was closer to the feeling you get at the end of a very long project, a tiredness that is also, underneath, a kind of relief. The body that had been arguing with me for weeks had arrived at something like agreement. We were no longer fighting about it. We had simply accepted the terms. The court had noticed before I did. They noticed the way courts notice everything, obliquely, without direct acknowledgement, in the quality of silences that appeared in rooms when I entered them. A conversation ending a beat too early. Eyes tracking me across the dinner table and then returning, carefully, to plates. The particular performance of not watching someone that requires just as much attention as watching them. Nora started leaving broth outside my door in the mornings. No knock. No note. Just the cup, still warm, sitting on the floor when I opened the door at 7. I drank it every time. I never said anything to her about it, and she never brought it up, and that arrangement was, in its way, the most generous thing anyone in the Spire had offered me. It was Stellan who said something directly. He caught me in the corridor outside the dining room on a Wednesday evening, or rather, he positioned himself in the corridor, which was different. Stellan did not catch people. He arranged situations in which people arrived at the conclusions he needed them to arrive at, and he had been doing this long enough that the machinery of it was invisible. He looked at me for a moment without speaking. His face was the kind of face that had been managed for so long that genuine expression lived very deep in it. You had to look for it in small things, the set of a muscle near the jaw, the particular angle of attention in the eyes. "You should tell him," he said. "There is nothing to tell." He didn't argue. He just looked at me, the way you look at a window in late autumn when you are calculating how much longer it will keep the cold from coming through. A practical assessment. Not unkind. He stepped aside and let me pass. I kept my pace even all the way to the stairwell. On the 4th step I stopped, one hand on the railing, and breathed for a moment. The stairwell smelled of old stone, and the particular dry warmth of the heating system working too hard against a building that did not want to be warm. I counted to 5. Then I kept going. The summons came an hour later. A folded note, delivered by the young court aide, whose name I had never learned because he moved through the Spire like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. The note was brief. Library.
Now.
Alaric's handwriting, precise, vertical, the handwriting of someone for whom the act of writing had never been casual. I stood with the note in my hands for longer than I needed to. One full breath, I thought. I am allowed one full breath of hoping before I walk up there. I took it. The hope was small and specific, that he had noticed. That something in the long weeks of my fading had finally registered as information, not as inconvenience, not as a management problem, but as information about what was happening in the room he occupied with me. I folded the note and went upstairs. The library at 11 at night is a different room than the library in the afternoon. The fire does something to it that I had never quite been able to account for, not just the warmth, but the way the light moves. The book spines along the east wall catch it and throw back amber, every title gilded regardless of whether it actually is, and the shadows above the shelves go so perfectly black that the ceiling seems to disappear. The room contracts. It becomes the size of the light, nothing more. Alaric was at the large table, not the chair by the fire. Papers spread across it, the court archives, boxes of them, the kind of organizational project that suggests someone has been in the building long enough that the primary record-keeping system has become a problem. He did not look up immediately. "My secretary," he said, "has made an error in translation. 18th century French. The document concerns the Northern Territory protocols, and I need it accurate before morning." He pushed a sheaf of papers toward the empty chair across from him. I sat down. The hope I had carried up the stairs did not leave quickly. It took perhaps 10 minutes to understand that this was not about me, that he had not noticed, that the summons was precisely what it appeared to be, nothing more, a practical requirement that I happened to be suited to meet. I understood this, and I sat across from him, and I began to read aloud, and after a while the understanding stopped mattering as much as the reading. His French was perfect, of course. 400 years of practice. He listened, corrected twice, said nothing else. But after the first 30 minutes, something happened to the quality of his attention. It sharpened, focused, turned toward the page in a way that was less like supervision and more like genuine interest. The document concerned a treaty negotiation, a dispute over boundaries that had apparently been mishandled by 3 successive court intermediaries, and at some point he began to respond to the text, a word here, a quiet observation there, nothing addressed to me directly, more like thinking aloud. For 40 minutes, the room was something other than cold. Not warm exactly, less absent of warmth. The fire did its work and his attention did something I had no precise word for, and I kept reading and my voice stayed even, and I did not remark on any of it. He said, when I reached the end of the final page, "That will do." He was already looking back at his own notes. I gathered the translated pages, set them in order, left them at his elbow. He did not look up. I crossed the room. I did not say goodnight. I sealed the box when I got back to my room. I had been leaving it slightly open, not intentionally, just the habit of a work in progress. I pressed the latch closed and heard it click and did not open it again. I told myself, getting into bed, that the 40 minutes had been enough. That they were a kind of proof, not of what I had hoped for, but of what I had always believed was underneath. The man who had been curious about a treaty dispute for 40 minutes at 11 at night was the man I had been making things for. He existed. The evidence was there. That was enough. I lay awake for 3 hours, running those 40 minutes over in my hands like beads on a string, counting them, feeling the weight of each one, setting them down, picking them up again. The fire had made his face look less like marble and more like a decision still being made. He had said that will do, and meant the work, and I had heard it as something else entirely, and I knew exactly what I was doing when I heard it that way. I did it anyway. Outside, the first real snow of December was beginning, settling over the Haymarket rooftops and the rail yards and the long flat dark of the Salt Creek corridor, covering everything that had been left out in the cold. The snow had stopped by morning, but the cold it left behind was a different kind of cold, settled, decided, the kind that has stopped being weather and started being a condition. I had slept 3 hours. I knew this not because I had watched the clock, but because the quality of the dark outside my window had changed twice, and I had noticed both times. My body had stopped arguing about sleep the way it had stopped arguing about most things. It simply reported what it needed and then accepted what it received, and somewhere in the last week that acceptance had become the whole of our arrangement. I was not fighting anything anymore. That was the clearest way I could put it. I had set down the last thing I was carrying, and my arms were empty, and the emptiness was not the same as loss. I carried the box upstairs before anyone else in the spire was awake. 5:30 in the morning. The library cold and dark except for the residual warmth from last night's fire, which had burned down to gray ash and a few coals that gave off more heat than light. I did not turn on a lamp. I knew the room well enough by then to move through it without one. The table's edge, the specific creak of the third floorboard from the window, the particular smell of the space when the fire was low and the books had been left alone for hours, something papery and dry and faintly mineral, like the inside of a very old argument. I set the box on his desk. I placed it in the center, not off to one side, not near the edge where it could be moved without decision. The center, where it would require a deliberate choice to put it anywhere else, where he would have to pick it up or work around it, and either way he would have to reckon with the fact that it was there. I had written the card the night before. One line, on a small square of cream notepaper, folded once. I tucked it beneath the latch, where it would only be found by someone who lifted the lid with the intention of opening the box fully. Not a greeting, not an explanation. One line that said what I needed to say, without requiring him to have earned it yet. I will not tell you what it said. Not yet. I stood at his desk for a moment after I had placed the box. The window behind it faced east, toward the rail lines and the flat dark of the prairie beyond the city, and the sky in that direction was beginning to separate. Not light yet, just the first suggestion that light was possible, a slightly different quality of darkness at the horizon. I looked at the box on his desk. the carved lid, the vine along the left edge, the small bird on the right, wings folded, facing left. I had done what I came to do. I went back to my room and opened the last jar of honey. I had bought it at the Haymarket Farmers Market in September, from a man with a folding table and 6 varieties arranged by darkness, who had let me taste 3 before I chose. This one was the palest, clover honey, he'd said, from hives kept west of the city, where the fields still ran open. I had been rationing it since October, 1 spoonful at a time, the way you ration something when you know you won't be going back for more. There was perhaps 4 spoonfuls left at the bottom of the jar. I sat at my kitchen table and ate it slowly, 1 spoon at a time in the dark. The sweetness of it was different at this hour. Heavier, more concentrated, the way certain things reveal their full weight only when everything else is quiet. It sat on the back of my tongue, and I let it stay there, and I thought about September, about the man with a folding table, about the particular light of the Haymarket on a Saturday morning when the whole city feels like it has remembered what it is. I had been happy in September. Not the large, announced kind of happy. The kind that lives in ordinary Saturday mornings and good honey, and the specific angle of autumn light on brick. I had been happy and I had not made a production of it, and now, sitting in my kitchen at 5:45 in the morning with the last of the jar, I was glad I hadn't. Glad I had just let it be what it was. That is what I felt. Not grief for what was ending. Satisfaction, quiet, specific, that I had been present for what I had. At some point, I moved to the chair by the window. The city was coming into its early light, the state capitol dome first, the way it always was, that particular limestone white going gold before anything else in the skyline caught up. Then the Holiday Inn Tower, the broadcast antennae blinking their slow red above the old warehouse district, and at the edge of visibility, just past the angle of glass on the Pinnacle Bank Arena, the thin spire of St. Mary's holding its place against the sky the way it had been holding it for over a century, long before any of the glass and steel around it existed. I had looked at this view many times from this chair. I had not always looked at it on purpose. Tonight, I was looking on purpose. The cold outside pressed against the glass, and I could feel it from where I sat, that slight give in the insulation, the way old windows transfer temperature before they transfer air. My hands were in my lap. They had gone quiet, finally. Not numb the way they had been going numb, just still. The distinction mattered, and I knew which one this was. I thought briefly about Nora, and whether she would understand, when she found the cup she left outside my door untouched in the morning. I thought she would. I thought she already did. I did not think about Alaric. I had said what I needed to say, in the one line on the card beneath the latch, and there was nothing left to add. What came next was his reckoning, his opening, his understanding or his failure to understand. I had given it to him. The rest was not mine to carry. What I thought about, in the last minutes before the dark behind my eyes became complete, was the bird on the box lid.
Small.
Wings folded. Facing left. I had carved it without a model from my hands, and whatever they knew that I didn't, and I had never identified it, had looked, briefly, in a field guide I borrowed from the 4th floor shelves, and found nothing that matched exactly. It was not a wren, not a sparrow, something between the two, or something that was neither, or something I had simply made up from the shapes my hands preferred. I had decided, in the end, that not knowing was its own kind of answer. A bird that couldn't be named was still a bird. It still meant what birds mean, the particular stubbornness of a thing that keeps being itself regardless of whether anyone has found the right word for it. My hands were in my lap. The Capitol dome was gold now, fully. I had been here. I had been exactly here, and I had made things with my hands, and I had gone back for what was thrown away, and I had kept the record. That was enough. That was, in the end, the whole of it. I will tell you what comes next. Not because I was there to see it, but because I knew him well enough to know. Some people you study so carefully that you can read the room they're in after you've left it. He was that kind of study. He noticed her absence on the second day. Not the first. The first day it was logistical. Her chair empty at the dinner table, a small administrative fact that required no explanation yet. People were absent from tables for reasons. He had other things to attend to. The second day, Nora informed him quietly, between the morning briefing and the first court session, that Elara had passed in the night. She used that word, passed, with the particular care of someone who has chosen it deliberately over several alternatives. She said it and then stood still and waited. He said, "I see." He returned to the briefing documents. This is not cruelty, exactly. It is the behavior of a man who has outlived so many people that death has become a category rather than an event. He filed it away. He moved through his morning. He did not think about the box on his desk, had not yet looked at it closely enough to register what it was. The weakness began on the fifth day. Not dramatic. Nothing about it announced itself. He reached for a document across the table and his hand, his 400-year-old hand, which had not trembled for centuries, paused midway, as if the instruction from his mind had traveled a slightly longer route than usual and arrived a fraction late. He looked at his hand for a moment. Then he picked up the document. By the 8th day, he was cold in a way that had no precedent in his memory. Not the cold of winter or stone or the spire's ancient resistance to warmth, something interior, structural, like a beam that has been load-bearing for so long that the first sign of failure is invisible until the floor shifts. His court noticed. He saw them noticing and said nothing, and they said nothing, and the silence between them was a different silence than the ones he was used to managing. Stellan came to him on the 10th evening. He stood in the doorway of the library, not entering, which was itself a message, and said, "The Omaha faction has moved 2 representatives into the city. I know. They are reading us as weakened. I know that too." Stellan was quiet for a moment. Then, "The box on your desk." Alaric looked at it. He had been moving around it for 10 days the way you move around something you have not decided what to do with yet. It was not large. It was not threatening. It sat in the center of his desk, and he had simply declined, each day, to address it. "She left it," he said. "Yes," Stellan said. "She did." Nothing else. Stellan left. The library settled back into its own silence, and the cold in Alaric's chest moved through him like a tide that had not read the schedule correctly, arriving at the wrong hour, receding before it should. He found it on the 14th night, at an hour when the rest of the spire was asleep. He had not planned to open it. He picked it up with the intention of moving it, placing it on the shelf with the other things he had not dealt with, the unanswered correspondence, the artifacts from defunct court negotiations, the accumulated objects of a long life managed rather than examined. His hands closed around the walnut, and he lifted it from the desk. The warmth hit him before the lid was open. He went still. It was not heat, not temperature the way temperature is measured. It was warmth with a specific weight to it, the weight of something that had been made slowly, remade deliberately, carried up 6 flights of stairs in the early morning dark by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. It smelled of bergamot and walnut shavings, and underneath both of those, something he had no word for, something his hands recognized before his mind caught up. He sat down. He opened the box. His own scarf. Charcoal wool. He recognized it, distantly, the way you recognize something you discarded without fully registering. And then he saw the hem. The mended hem. Stitches he had never looked at closely enough to know were fraying, repaired with such care that the repair was nearly invisible, which meant she had not done it to be noticed. She had done it because it needed doing. The pressed goldenrod frame was beneath it, turned right side up, the goldenrod and bergamot still holding their shape, still themselves. On the back of the frame, tucked into the narrow space between the backing and the wood, a small folded note. He opened it. "I saw you." 3 words. Her handwriting, unhurried, clear, the writing of someone who has decided not to waste the gesture on anything that isn't exactly right. Not "I loved you." Not "I forgave you." "I saw you." He sat with it for a long time. This is the part that costs him. Not the death. He has metabolized deaths for centuries. Not the weakness in his body, though that is still there, still present, a low current of wrongness he cannot will away. What costs him is the understanding, which arrives the way understanding always arrives when it has run out of room, not in a rush, but through the slow closing of all other exits. He turns the note over in his hands, and he thinks about what she brought him. The scarf he set aside. The frame he placed face down. The herb jars he had not known were moved to storage until right now, until this moment, holding an empty jar that smells of something medicinal and sweet, that smells of a person deciding what to do with her last good weeks. She was not giving him beautiful things. She was showing him she had found something worth seeing. In him. In the cold. In the 400 years of a man who had stopped asking questions and started delivering conclusions, and had been alone inside that efficiency for so long that he had stopped knowing it was a choice. She went back for what he had thrown away. She believed it was still worth something. He carries the box to the balcony. December in Lincoln at 4 a.m. The air has a quality of absolute stillness, the kind that belongs to cities in deep winter before the day has remembered itself. The sky to the east is the color of the inside of an oyster shell.
Pale.
Neither dark nor light. The particular hour when the world is still deciding. He stands at the railing and he waits. The warmth from the box moves through his hands and up through his arms, and he does not question it or examine it, or try to understand its mechanism. He simply receives it, which is, for him, a new act. The first new act in a very long time. The light comes. Not in a rush. The way it always comes, gradually, then with conviction, the horizon going from gray to pale gold to something that has no adequate name, the Capitol dome catching it first, then the towers, then the long flat line of the Platte River Valley to the east going amber, and then bright, the whole of it arriving the way things arrive when they have been coming for a long time, and you simply were not in a position to see. He stands there until the light is full and high. Stellan finds him hours later, still at the railing, the box in his hands, facing east. Stellan does not speak. He stands at the door to the balcony and looks at the man he has served for 2 centuries and says nothing, because there is nothing that the moment requires from him, and he is wise enough to know it. Alaric does not weep.
He does not speak.
He holds the box that she made from the things he threw away, and he watches the morning finish arriving over a city she walked through, alone, making things with her hands, keeping the record, going back. He never opens his hands. She opened hers. That is the difference between them. That is the whole of it. There are others like her in this city. Women who chose something impossible and gave themselves to it without asking for a witness. They don't leave explanations. They leave evidence, in the rooms that stay warm after they've gone, in the objects that outlast them, in the particular quality of an absence that makes itself felt long after any presence should. The men they chose mostly never understood what they were looking at, not until it was the only thing left. If you understood this story without needing it explained, you already know which kind of woman you are. If this reached you, if something in Elara's quiet, stubborn love felt like a language you already carry, you are not alone in it. There are women here who understand this without needing it spelled out.
Subscribe and stay.
The next story is already waiting, and it belongs to someone just like her.